Hello and welcome to Under the Superscope, where we take a look at some of the most famous games of all time and try to work out if they still hold up today. It doesn't matter if they're 5 or 35, all we want to know is why these games are fun. First-person shooters have taken many forms over the years, whether we're looking at Doom, Half-Life, Halo, Call of Duty, or Overwatch. Each time a game comes along that redefines the expectations of a genre, and with that, console generations of shooters tend to handle completely differently to the next. Yet despite the industry moving forward, going back to play Doom and Halo still produces positive results. Sometimes standardizing doesn't mean improving, and when a game is fully designed around and understands its limitations, that's when it becomes timeless. Now, it's no secret that consoles weren't exactly the home of shooters in the 90s. Sure, there were a fair amount of Doom ports, but it was the PC space where things were really bustling. Also remember that outside of a grace period of Disney games, video games based off movies were generally, to put it lightly, bad. Well, in came GoldenEye, a licensed N64 exclusive shooter that not only became the third best-selling game on the platform, but it may be the only licensed game to be remembered more fondly than its source material. Perhaps the greatest thing about GoldenEye is if you're someone who hasn't seen the movie or just doesn't care about Bond, then you'll still be able to have a good time. Rare didn't use the game as an opportunity to adapt the movie, but rather simply just make a game in the purest form of the word. If you haven't seen the film, then you essentially do not get any story out of GoldenEye. You'll instead get something more along the lines of Doom's progression. Each level just kind of loads after the last without any kind of story transition. There are quick notes to provide context, but that's all you're gonna get. GoldenEye also takes a couple of notes from Mario 64, where each level is essentially a sandbox with multiple objectives. If you're playing on the lowest difficulty, then you can ram through them, usually in a linear fashion. However, the harder modes get far more in-depth, and it's here where a lot of the levels truly come into their own. Story and linearity often go hand in hand, and so your average Call of Duty campaign's progression is dictated by NPC comrades or directional waypoints. So while a Call of Duty level may be like this, a GoldenEye level is more like this. Story is not a driving factor behind level progression, and thus we're encouraged to find our own way to progress. On the easiest difficulty, you won't even need to touch large chunks of these sandboxes, whereas when you crank it up, you'll be getting something a little more complex. I'm a big fan of difficulty upgrades being more than just having less health and enemies having more health. And with GoldenEye's setup, I actually feel more inclined to replay the game on a higher notch, whereas with most shooters, I'm fine just shelving it after the first playthrough. Part of this may also come down to how brief each GoldenEye level can be. When you know what you're doing, I don't think there's a single one that can take more than 5 minutes to complete, and so mastery becomes a part of the replay value. See, unlike modern game design, there aren't waypoints showing you where to go. GoldenEye will often give you vague hints like, go to the control room and disable the communication device. This begs the question, where's the control room? When you take away on-screen prompts showing you exactly where to go, you begin to take in the environment more and use your own navigational skills. Now, that's not to say the N64 hardware always does a good job enabling this, as some levels look like, well, this, but usually things are very clear, especially indoors. So is this why GoldenEye is loved? Because it has a series of well-designed navigational methods and optional objectives? Well, it's certainly a pillar, but there's a lot more to take into account. Of course, when people think of GoldenEye, they think of this, the multiplayer. We'll get into that a bit more in a moment, but before we do, let's look at the input that brings the entire package together. Without this, every single element of this game would just fall apart, and that's of course, the controls. What Wolfenstein 3D and Doom did was give the illusion of 3D space, where the vertical axis is never an element of movement. So when enemies are above you and you just shoot forward, it will still magically hit them. GoldenEye's control method was an evolution of this. We're still moving and aiming with a single stick, but this was further transitioned to work in 3D space. Using the C buttons, we're able to strafe left and right while looking up and down with the respective keys. It expands our moveset, but it's not a second stick. The reason GoldenEye is remembered for its multiplayer is because of how accessible the controls are. Thanks to a generous amount of aim assist, all you really need to be doing is looking in the general direction of your opponent and you're pretty much guaranteed a hit. This means anyone of any skill level is able to immediately pick up an N64 controller and have a good time, and that's something that's near impossible with dual analog. Do you remember the first time you picked up a dual analog shooter? It probably looks something like this. Maneuvering a single stick is one thing, but two requires a certain amount of experience and motor skills. Think of it like rubbing your stomach while patting your head. If you look back to early stages of 3D development, many Japanese developers were against relying on the second stick for camera control. This is seen in Metal Gear Solid, Devil May Cry, Resident Evil 4, and so many others. It's a challenge that I think many of us take for granted because we've been doing it for so long. Whenever I play games with those who typically play on a casual basis, a dual analog shooter is always the one they struggle with most. Eliminating that barrier may seem like a severe limitation at the cost of accessibility, but GoldenEye takes full advantage of this limitation through excellent encouragement of map dominance. Every player starts the round unarmed, and so it's a scurry to find something to defend yourself with, and then find something to dominate with. Playlists like Golden Gun add so much tension, as while the Golden Gun is a one-shot kill weapon, it also essentially adds a giant arrow on your head, especially if you're playing with 4 players. That's also kind of the charm of playing in split screen. Of course, screen peeking is wrong, and none of us ever do it, but let's just say that we notice that the other player has a shotgun. That is our cue to take them down, not only for points, but also to steal their shotgun, because we want it for ourselves. Throughout all the years of multiplayer shooter design, the act of map dominance has remained my favourite. When you can just spawn with preset loadouts, an entire layer of strategy and motivation is just stripped away, something Halo 4 in particular got very wrong. For me, what makes GoldenEye so special is the accessible control scheme, player-orientated non-linear level design, and emphasis on weapon dominance. And so it's a little disheartening that the 2010 remake of GoldenEye doesn't have any of this. When Eurocom made their own version of GoldenEye, they didn't necessarily remake the N64 version, but rather made another adaptation of the movie. And to line up with the Casino Royale era of Bond, Daniel Craig replaced Pierce Brosnan, and with that came more than just a character change, but a complete tonal one. I believe part of the reason that GoldenEye 64 is still so beloved today is that it doesn't actually lean too hard on the Bond license. Sure, it's always blasting Bond-style music, but these levels could be from anything. However, GoldenEye on the Wii is completely orientated by narrative and focuses way too much on retelling GoldenEye as a Daniel Craig film, rather than letting you experience the movie's greatest set pieces in your own way. There's also no question what shooter it was influenced by, and no, it's not GoldenEye. This is moment for moment Call of Duty. The gun range is Modern Warfare, the slow-mo sequence is Modern Warfare 2, and the control scheme falls in line with the standards of the series. While not a bad game, GoldenEye Wii doesn't understand what made the original so great. Instead, it works as a Call of Duty adaptation of the GoldenEye movie. Sure, there are some areas that attempt to redesign levels from the N64 original, but they're always short-lived and just emphasize where the game went wrong. The intro level, for instance. On N64, the camera swoops in, you're Bond, you shoot a guy, you cause havoc, you move forward, you cause even more havoc. On Wii, there's a cutscene. You wait.
Now, let's go.
These guys are taken care of in the cutscene. You cause a little havoc, and then there's a long scripted event. GoldenEye 64 has an accessible control scheme, player-orientated non-linear level design, and an emphasis on weapon dominance. GoldenEye Wii has a control scheme with a learning curve, scripted and often linear level design, and a multiplayer with weapon loadouts. Again, not a bad game, but GoldenEye Wii stands as one of the worst remakes out there, and doesn't really carry over any of the original's foundational pillars. In 2018, I can still invite friends over who rarely play games, and they can quickly grasp the simple controls and intuitive map control of GoldenEye 64. It may sound like a huge downgrade to play a first-person shooter with just one analog stick, and I'm sure if you slapped on this control scheme to any modern shooter it would not work, but GoldenEye makes it work, and when the multiplayer is as easy to play and continuously fun as this, then it's no question why it became the N64's third best-selling game, ahead of even Ocarina of Time and Super Smash Bros. Simply put, GoldenEye is a multiplayer classic, and the funny thing is the multiplayer portion almost didn't make it into the game. According to programmer Steve Ellis, one of the things that always strikes me as crazy in retrospect is that until something like March or April of 1997, there wasn't a multiplayer mode at all. It hadn't even been started. It really was put together at the last minute, something you wouldn't even dream of doing these days, and it was done without the knowledge or permission of the management at Rare or Nintendo. This may explain why so many of the multiplayer maps are pulled directly from the single-player levels, but because they were always designed to be open and non-linear, they transferred perfectly to the multiplayer climate. Usually on this show we'll take apart game design and work out exactly why certain decisions were made, but when it comes to GoldenEye's multiplayer, I think that a lot of it was just pure dumb luck. The control scheme wasn't put together to be accessible for multiplayer matches. They didn't spend years ironing out the multiplayer maps. GoldenEye just sort of works, and 21 years later, I think there's only a handful of shooters that come close in pure, unadulterated fun. So does GoldenEye hold up? Heck yeah it does. Obviously, it's from a different era to what we have today, and thus certain elements may come across as jarring, but get a few friends together and have a round of Golden Gun and just try not to have a few laughs. May want to turn on DK mode and have a round of slappers too, just for good measure. Oh, and if you really want a modern dual stick setup, you can play like this, but the single stick setup feels far more intuitive with how aim assist works. Just because something is a modern standard doesn't mean it's the way to have the most fun, and I don't think there's a game that expresses that more than GoldenEye 007. I also love how sneaky Bond looks while inside the N64. We can see you, Pierce Brosnan! Is there anything that you love or don't love about GoldenEye? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe to GameXplain for more episodes from Under the Super Scope and everything else gaming as well. Catch you next time. Bye!